And our stars today are Stad and Kevin Chant. Maybe you remember they were in SQL Friday last season, and they're coming back, but with a new presentation, which is going to be more GitHubs oriented than the last one, which was purely Azure Devops. So welcome, Kevin. Welcome, Sander. You're both Dutch, kind of, right?
I'm natively Dutch. Kevin
will never be
who's
natively
British
Dutch.
will probably realise I'm not Dutch.
Anyway, whenever you're ready, just take over the screen and the stage is all yours. For anyone else, if you have questions, put them in the chat and I will interrupt Kevin in the middle of a sentence or something.
Yeah, sure. Anyway, hello everybody and welcome to today's session, GitHub Devops Duet SQL Friday edition. And tell about how the development team and an operations team have to bond together and start using GitHub for SQL deployments.
So for the next 60 minutes, we'll be talking about GitHub and how you can use it to do your data platform deployments, from creating a work item all the way to its release. We'll be discussing both the cloud and on-premise versions of GitHub, as well as its features, including the source control, the issues, GitHub Actions, and packages. And even though this is a GitHub session, we'll also mention stuff about Azure DevOps. And at the end of the session, you will have a basic understanding of the main features of GitHub and how it can be used to do your SQL Server deployments.
So, in this session, one of us is from the SQL development team and the other from the SQL operations team. Our managers decided that both teams will merge into one DevOps team, so that we're all one big happy family.
But in reality, this should be a real gradual process. However, since this is only a 60-minute session, we've taken it upon ourselves to speed up this process. And in addition, our manager has decided that the development team lead will be the Scrum Master and the operations team lead will be the product owner.
Now, for those of you who don't know, a product owner is responsible for translating business needs into workable backlog items for Scrum sprints, which means they must speak to stakeholders at various levels within the business. In addition, they are ultimately responsible for prioritizing those items, even though they may get input about those priorities from various stakeholders.
And the Scrum Master's role is to empower the team to do those backlog items by encouraging how they work and removing any impediments if they appear.
Anyway, before we go any further, Sander, let's introduce ourselves.
Yes, so I'm Sander, I'm a SQL Server DBA, and as Magnus told you, I'm from the Netherlands. I'm a cloud and data center MVP, which means I do a lot of stuff with PowerShell and all these kind of things like Azure DevOps. I'm a major contributor to the DBA Tools project. And if you have any questions after this session, you are free to send me an email, which is shown in this slide. I'm also on Twitter, and I have a blog, which I try to write as much as I can. The demos you'll see today will also be available on my GitHub page. Go to the presentations and find this session, and you will be able to download these demos, and you can change them, reteach them, and use them, whatever you want to do with them. And now Kevin has a slightly more complicated bio than I have. So go ahead, Kevin.
Well, thanks for that, Sander. And anyway, as it says on the screen now, my name is Kevin Chant. I'm a senior database architect living in the Netherlands. However, as we were just discussing earlier, I'm actually originally from the UK. However, I live in the Netherlands due to the fact my wife is Dutch. So basically, I'm an Englishman living in the Netherlands, working for a French-based company because he met a woman in Australia. Now, whenever I say this out loud, I realise why Sander thinks this is complicated. I have over 24 years experience working in IT, and over that time I've worked in various sectors, including the banking, oil and health insurance industries. In fact, those supported companies are in the top 10 of the Fortune 500 list. Now, I've worked with all versions of SQL Server in one form or another, as well as other database management systems over the years. And I have various certifications, including both the old and the new style MCSC. And more recently, I became a Microsoft Certified Devops Engineer Expert, which is kind of relevant for today's session. I'm also a Microsoft Certified Trainer and a Microsoft Data Platform MVP. And like Sander, you can find me in various ways on social media, and I have my own GitHub repo, etc. as well. And like today's host, I'm one of the organizers of the Data Weekender conference. Nice plug there.
Yeah. So anyway, we should discuss whether we want to use the cloud or the on-premise version of GitHub. For example, GitHub Enterprise or GitHub One. Because if we use a cloud-based product, we have other versions to choose from.
I thought there was only the free version or enterprise that we could choose from.
Oh, there's a couple. So,
well, since you mentioned it, Sander, you might as well list them all. However, before Sander does, because I happen to know that we're on Teams today, feel free, everybody, to guess how many versions there actually are in the chat before Sander starts reading all of them off. So nobody wants to guess, so go for it, Sander.
So there is the first one is the GitHub free for user accounts. And then there is GitHub Pro, which comes with extra features like the pull request reviewers. Then there is the GitHub free for organizations, which includes things like team discussions. And that's good for entry-level teams. And that's followed by the GitHub team, which introduces a lot more features than the free version. For example, team pull request reviewers. And we have then the GitHub Enterprise, which can be used for cloud-based or self-hosted. It has GitHub Connect for unified contributors, and you can manage billing for multiple GitHub organizations. And finally, there is GitHub One, which has all the features of Enterprise, along with additional support, insights, and advanced security.
Hey, how can security in GitHub Enterprise get any more advanced?
Well, it allows you to use security features used in public repositories like code scanning and dependency reviews, private repositories as well.
Okay, well, on that note, I'm just going to put into the chat now a link for everybody so you can have a look at all these different products, as they call it, from GitHub. So anyway, personally, I'd like to use the on-premises version of GitHub so we can handle security better on premises. For example, install something like GitHub Enterprise on the virtual machine. However, the downside is that we'd have to build one or more of these servers with GitHub Enterprise installed for business continuity reasons. Plus, we'd have to invest a lot of money straight away and justify that to the business. In addition, we'd have to maintain and patch all those servers.
Yeah, but if you use the GitHub in the cloud instead, you wouldn't have to patch and maintain anything, as it's all maintained behind the scenes for you.
That's true. And we can still secure whichever version we use anyway. Besides, whichever we use, we must consider security and compliance anyway to keep our auditors happy. Luckily, GitHub is well structured and easy to manage.
The main points we want you to take away from this section is that there are multiple versions of GitHub, including some very good free versions you can use. And if you install the GitHub on premises, you have to patch and maintain everything yourself for those servers, whereas the cloud-based version, you don't have to do anything at all. So let's go and look at some things.
And this is the part where we do the seamless transition, everybody, for Sander to share his screen.
Seamless. There we go. So when you go to GitHub, this is your profile dashboard. If you go to the settings, there's a lot of stuff you can do there. So you have your profile settings over here. You can, this is a really nice feature because I like the dark version. You can change this appearance. There's your account security. Please enable two-factor authentication if you haven't already, because nowadays this is almost a must-have. So you have your billing and plans. I'm on GitHub Pro at the moment, and that gives me a little more features, some more minutes for the actions, etc. Security log, which is quite interesting if you have something that happened, somebody tried to get into your account. Your repositories, all the organizations you're part of, and the applications. And you have to be careful there to not revoke any application settings, because it's not easily to put back. Kevin?
No comment. Anyway, I think this is the part where you go through the organization settings.
Yeah. So let's go back to the organizations. And these are all the organizations that we have. And just like Azure DevOps, you have a service where your account has multiple organizations. So here are all the organizations that are going to my account. And you can create your own organization, but just by clicking this button, and then you can pick a plan to set up your new organization. We can do a variety of things here. So if we go back to our project, and so we have the repositories, we have packages that we can do with GitHub. We can add people to our organization, and we can create teams as well, and projects. So you can create your new projects right here. And if you go into the settings, it's similar to the profile that you saw. So I'm not going to go through every one of them. But there is, for instance, make sure that your billing and plan is correct. So we have a GitHub free for this organization. You have like webhooks that you can install. So it's something like a third-party build server could be initialized to do a build based on a pull request. Third-party access, so that needs a password, but you can add third-party applications to your organization, as well as all the projects that are in here. So you can say, okay, enable projects for this organization, do stuff with the teams, so allow teams to have discussions, and secrets, which we'll see later on, as is a great advantage to obfuscate something like passwords. And lastly, I can just block Kevin if I want to, because I don't just the way he talks to me in this organization, so I can just block him.
Please don't block me. But since you're going to try and block me, I think I'm going to take the screen back from you.
Yeah.
So there you go. So obviously some of that can be very useful as well. Of course, there's other things we can configure as well in those settings if we dive even deeper into them, but this was obviously only a 60-minute long session.
I think you think you're sharing, but I don't think you are sharing, Kevin.
You don't think I'm sharing? Am I not sharing? No. I think I intended to share.
So did I think.
There you go. Now I actually really am sharing. So anyway, on a completely different note, for anybody who is looking to create their own organization, like what Sandra just showed you, I will throw that in the chat for you all now. I think you were going to mention
Okay.
something about the history.
Yeah. So what? By the way, Kevin, I want to mention that because that's really something that Azure DevOps doesn't have. Is when you go back to GitHub, you have a brief overview of your history back to your organization, and doesn't have that in Azure DevOps, does it?
No, but then again, I can link to my Azure Active Directory users nice and easily in Azure DevOps.
Yeah. So the main thing we want you to take away, want you to realize is that GitHub settings can be fine-tuned, and that the features depend on the version you're running and if your repository is private or public. So anyway, now we've covered the main admin stuff. Let's cover some version control options with GitHub.
You mean like source safe?
No. The clue is with the GitHub use, is within the name. Git has become the de facto standard for the distributed version control systems. So the only thing that is supported with GitHub is Git.
So basically, everybody, if you want to use a Team Foundation version control, you'll have to look at an alternative solution instead. I hear Azure Repo supports it, Sander.
Yeah, it does. So, well, let me show you how it looks in GitHub. So, screen again. Luckily, this time, everything goes smoothly. So, if we go into the version control, we can just go into into a repository, and there is a lot of stuff that comes around in here. So, we have the code itself. If you have a README, it shows it directly to you. You can also see if it is tagged or which packages are included with it, who are the contributors, and which environment we're talking about. And it gives you a small overview of all the code that's being used. We have the issues where, and they may be a bit too strict, but this is also the place where you would ask for new features, not particular an issue, but something that you would like to be implemented. And you can add labels to all these issues, the pull requests if they are there. So pull request is something if you want to do different branches, the actions, all the projects involved. If there's a wiki, you can deploy a wiki as well. Security policies, so you can set up a security policy for your repository where you can just say, okay, this version supports all the current updates, so everybody is aware. If you have like something like GitHub Pro, you can do insights, so you can see all the contributors and all, or if it's public, you can get these insights immediately as well. So you can see how many contributors and what the community did, all the traffic and the commits. It's quite interesting to see. And at last, we have, of course, settings. And there's a lot less settings than we had in the profile or in the organization. Again, you can manage access. Come on, go ahead. So who has access to this repository? Security and analysis, you can enable and disable those. All the branches that are involved, so you might want to set the default branch name. Nowadays, we don't use the master anymore. So by default, it is main for new repositories, and you can change this in existing repositories as well. You can set branch protection rules, integrations with other apps, deployment keys, and here is where I mentioned before all the secrets. So you can set all the strings with passwords and use that in your GitHub Actions workflows to reference, so you don't have to put in the clear text passwords in your workflow. And again, there's moderation, so I can just limit existing users and limit prior to contributors and all those kind of things. So a lot of stuff that you can tweak around in settings. And of course, some of these settings depend on which version of GitHub you're running. Like I mentioned, if you have a public repository, you get more features than if you have the same free account and then keep it private.
Yeah, in fact, if I actually take back control of the screen again as well, let's see if this works now. There's something else I want to we can quickly show in repositories as well. So say, for instance, you can actually search for other repositories on GitHub. And if you click on here, you can see it's quite fast return. And for example, you can actually see that Azure Data Studio. Microsoft have the repo for that in GitHub. And of course, this search at the top, as you just noticed, is really, really fast. Rumor has it, though, is based on another database engine. So let's quickly move forwards. Sander, what about branching strategies? Because I hear they're pretty important.
Yeah, they are. So, well, there are various that we can use. There are a couple that are the most popular ones. There is the Git flow and the GitHub flow.
So what's the main difference between those two? Because they sound pretty similar to me.
Yeah, and they are. So the major difference between the two is that with the Git flow, you don't directly merge into the main branch. There's always something like a development branch. You don't merge into the main unless it's a hotfix. And with the GitHub workflow, which there's no development branch, and there are only feature branches that are merged into the main branch. And each feature, and everybody can imagine that GitHub was the one that created that, and they actually use this continuously in their production environment. And us devs have been using source control for many years. So if we do something like pair programming, a dev and ops can actually get used to using Git.
Pair programming?
No, pair programming, where two people write code together and literally next to each other. But nowadays with COVID, that might be a problem. But research has shown that it usually takes a bit longer to do. However, it means you end up with more stable code and learn new coding practices better.
Would that mean there's a lot of overhead involved with that practice?
Yeah, like I said, it takes a little longer to do. And there is about a 15% overhead involved, but that overhead is largely compensated by the increased quality of code. And of course, there are other methods that we can use, like code reviews. And at the end of the day, it's something that we just need to experiment with and see what works best for us.
Okay, so what's to stop somebody coding their own release and pushing it straight to the main branch?
So that is a really important question. And there is something like branching policies, one of which is that two people have to approve the updates to the main branch. So if with a pull request, and it does this by making you create something like a pull request. And if you, I'll give you one guess as to which awesome service came up with that name.
I'm kind of guessing GitHub. It sounds good, and I think we need that to be SOX compliant anyway, since we do our financial data. So how do we actually do that in GitHub?
So let me go there. Let me share my screen again. There we go. So when I'm in a repository, I can create a pull request. So if I go in here and I say, okay, new pull request, I can compare multiple different branches. So I am going to say this branch is going into main. And at that point, it's going to compare those two branches and say, okay, I've got some changes and I can quickly go over those, but that's not really efficient in this window. So create a pull request and you can give it a name and leave a comment. And at that point, you can also set the reviewers that need to be in here. And you can also see the different files that changed. And if you go and create a pull request at that moment, I'm not going to do that in the demo right now because it's going to kick off one of our actions, which takes a couple minutes to do. So, but if you push the button, the pull request will be created and somebody is able to review and approve that. So if I go back into the settings and go into the branches, there are one. I'm going to go into this one. Go here. I can add a rule. It's a branching protection rule, and I can apply a pattern. So maybe I want to say, okay, I want to be this for the main branch, and I want to require the amount of pull request reviewers to be at least 1 or 2. To be SOX compliant, you have to have 2. Let's set this to 2. And there are some other, so we probably don't want to include administrators, restrict people who can push to matching branches, so maybe some people are allowed or not. So this is where you would set up those branching policies, which will automatically be implemented if you create a pull request. And these are the main points we want you to take away from GitHub. GitHub supports only Git version control. Nowadays, it has become the de facto standard. I rarely see other people use anything else than Git. So thank Linus for developing that for us. Anybody who doesn't know, Linus Torvalds is the one who initially created Git because he was frustrated with how version control worked for him. And Git also hooks in really nice with Visual Studio and Azure Data Studio as well.
Yeah, and just to show how nicely it fits in, if I go back to my screen now to share again, you can actually see this is Azure Data Studio. This is a database project in Azure Data Studio, and this is actually synchronized with a repository in GitHub.
Nice.
So anyway, we've already discussed work items in GitHub since we're going to be using it to organize our backlog items.
Nice. So, well, we have a section dedicated to issues, so people can add their issues here and there and get dealt with. So we can even put a level of automation on them. So it's really simple to use, and people have been using it in GitHub for years. So
Okay.
if I just show you how that looks like. So this is a particular issue part. So I have an issue and I can just go in and I can assign people to it. So I can say, okay, I need to assign a particular person, or I can assign myself. There are labels that I can add to. And with labels, you can add that automation part to your issues. So maybe something that you want to kick off, certain workflow or anything like that. You can see the projects that it's involved with. Maybe it's involved with certain milestones, like certain releases that you have. And if it's linked to any pull requests. So if you use like the pound sign, the hashtag with and reference a PR, you can actually automatically reference pull requests. And if that pull request gets merged, and it will automatically be closed as well. So there is a level of automation that you want to implement as well.
That sounds good. And I'm guessing that for plan work, we'll have to create a project in our organization instead.
Yep. So let me go to the projects. So if I go back to the organization, we have projects as well. In fact, GitHub has various boards to manage our repositories. So if I go in and just create a new project, I can just go in and say demo, and I can select multiple different templates out of it. So I can choose Kanban or an automated one that moves issues and pull requests along the way. And and then with reviews or bug triage. Those are the templates that you can use, or just use none if you want to create your own. And so this is a really powerful and really handy feature to use within your projects.
Okay, what about tags? Can we use
I kind of mentioned those already. So if I go to my demo project, if you go into the issues, you can use labels to tag a issue as well.
Okay. So that's the same as using the git tag from the command line, yeah?
Similar. It supports the tags just like you GitHub from the command line. I think labels are pretty easy to use, and we can automate. Like I said before, we can automate our actions with those labels as well. So it's really handy feature.
Well, sounds good. So if I take the screen back a minute.
So you might be surprised to know that what GitHub introduced its own CI/CD mechanism a while back. It's called GitHub Actions, and it's purely YAML based, so nobody gets confused about what format to use. Plus, the marketplace is dynamic. None of it don't have to install anything with extensions and party extensions. So none of that nonsense involved.
Well, that's great, because it means we can create YAML CI/CD pipelines in GitHub directly. But how would we use GitHub Actions to update and deploy SQL Server?
Well, we could look at to deploy either state-based or migration-based deployments.
Well, what's the main difference between those two?
So state-based is that you have your state of your project, all your objects and all your tables or procedures and all the scripts are in your project, and that entire state of that project is compared to the target, and then then all the differences are scripted out and deployed directly to the target. With migration-based, there is a script for changes, and those are implemented or applied incrementally instead. So migration-based is a very good way to do the deployments. There are pros and cons for every type of deployment you have. But looking at our project and how many changes we will have, I think state-based would be better for us. And it's pretty easy to do to create such a project. So let me share my screen. So let's open this one. This one as well. So I had to do I had to create like 20 to 30 projects for our databases when we started to do this at the company where I work for. And this became tedious very fast. So the thing that we wanted to do was separate the data model from the unit tests. And that was a lot of work, because you had to go in and say, okay, a new solution, create a new project, and then add a new project and do all the things manually. So I went in and looked at creating a template from that. And I used the PS module development PowerShell module to do that. It's able to create a template for a single file, but also for an entire directory with all its files included. So with a few tweaks here and there to get it all working, I created a template called the SSDT with TSQL template. And this script will create a project that download the entire template and then create that project with this little command right here. This is the most important one, the info psmd template. If I run that, it will go and download that template for me. So it will update to the latest version. You don't have to do that every single time, but just for demo purposes. And now I have my project. So I already have that opened in Visual Studio. And if I go in, you can see that I have two different projects in here. So there's the unit testing data. Unit testing is the name of the project, and the data is just.
And that's the same project that I showed in Azure Data Studio earlier, by the way.
Yeah. And this is the tests project. So I want to separate the tests from the data model because I don't want those objects to be duplicates or anything. So this project will just inherit the other one as a reference. And this contains all my objects. You can also, if you do it the first time, you can do an import and then say, okay, I want to import all the objects from that database. So this is a really easy and fast way to start doing database deployments and create your SDT solutions. And I can also show you just a little thing, because if you go in, I already made this for you. There is a GitHub workflow included. So if you go and want to start doing anything with the actions, you don't have to build an entire workflow. This workflow will enable you to do the build. So it will do the entire build for you and then test your project, both in SQL Server 2017 and 2019, and then deploy all these tests for you. And you can just remove the 2019 if you don't want to do anything with 2019. But it uses Docker images for that. Let's go in. Actions. Oh, no, there's not that one. There we go. Here are the actions.
And we'll cover those in a bit as well, because I want to quickly ask you about T-SQL-T, because I heard you mention it just now.
Oh, yeah. So just as you notice that I'm lazy as hell when it comes to repetitive tasks, you can also do stuff with with T-SQL-T, and I like T-SQL-T, which is the unit testing framework for SQL Server databases. And I like it because it keeps the developer in its T-SQL-T bubble. They don't need to learn anything like PowerShell with Pester or C# to do kinds of unit testing. So they only write T-SQL. But if you do that and you don't have those unit tests at the beginning, I want to have something like checks if the tables are there. Does my table have the correct columns? Is my store procedure there? Does it have the correct parameters? Are all the indexes there? All the constraints? So those are really basic tests. And I therefore created the T-SQL-T test generator, which is in the PowerShell gallery, by the way, if you want to download that. And it will take the current state of your database and then look at all the objects and generate tests for them. That looks a little like this. So if I go in, I already created those, and it takes like a couple minutes to generate all these tests. But one of the things it creates is the one for the collation. So you don't want to have anything going wrong with the database collation, because that creates a whole lot of havoc in your deployments. Another one is see if a certain object exists, or does my table have the correct columns, for instance, one I mentioned. And these can help you really get you started doing unit testing and making sure your project.
That sounds good. Before we carry on to the next bit, because I want to elaborate a bit more about this as well, Joseph O'Brien has a question.
Sure.
Good morning. I'm in the United States, and it's early in the morning. And thank you very much for doing this. So I'm going to be a little selfish here and sort of describe my situation. I have a gigantic database in terms of the number of objects and the number of store procedures, like one of the largest ones I've ever seen. And it's been not well cared for a long time. And so the problem I have is I'm right at this point here. So I've used your template and I've imported a database, and the project is not buildable. It's not buildable because there's a lot of problems with the code in the sense that there is code that references objects that don't exist, right? So that's fixable. But there are literally so what I describe it as, there's a problem with the SSDT linter, right? So they use this construct where they would have a parent store procedure that would allocate a temp table, and then the child store procedures would reference that temp table. And I've seen blog posts on the internet about how to sort of fix this so the linter doesn't complain, but is it really? So I'm thinking, right, to do all this, to get this into some sort of CI/CD pipeline and to get it migration based, you would need a buildable SSDT project. Am I wrong in to assume that part of the whole CID pipeline requires a buildable, something that creates that you could create a DAC pack from, right? Yeah. Like that, isn't that sort of like the crux of it? And so just as an aside, like you can't extract a DAC pack from the state of the database because of these bad references. So am I going down the right path, that this is just like a tremendous amount of technology debt that needs to be just sort of like dealt with?
Well, Joseph, you hang on a minute. We're about to demonstrate one of these workflows now. And if you and Sander exchange details, and obviously Sander can cover it with you after the session, because we're about to demo the whole workflow now, so you can see it in action. And then if Sander gives you his details, you two can talk about it after the session. Is that okay?
Very good.
Yeah, because it's not an easy answer that I can do in 30 seconds. So
I know, and I apologize for sucking you into my world. So
you know what you do? Are you on DM me on Twitter, and then we'll do this after session. Okay.
Sounds like a good plan.
Anyway, on that note, as I was saying, we were just about to actually demonstrate one of these workflows now, which obviously Joseph was talking about. So I'm just very quickly syncing with GitHub to show this in action, Sander. So this is where I now have to do a bit of a catch up for everybody. So I've just done that change and I've synced it up to this repository using Azure Data Studio. And as you can see, this has now started a GitHub action to be performed. And this is actually based on your one, Sander, from your own template. Made a few tweaks. Now, before anybody panics about the text being really small here, GitHub does this initially just to show a big picture view of your workflow. But what they also do, which is very nice, and if you scroll down, look at the bottom, you can see we can zoom in. You don't get this in another solution that I can think of off the top of my head. And also, not only can I zoom in to make it easier to read, we have dynamic panning. Very nice little touches by GitHub on this. Well appreciated from somebody like me who likes building big pipelines. So, like I said, Sander, I took your build. I then went off and I took your unit testing as well. I stripped out the 2017 version. I know you've just told our audience that they can take out 2019 if they want. I took out your 2017 and I moved it into a local Docker container. So once the unit testing's been completed, I get it to deploy the 3 environments called integration, staging, and production to represent the 3 different types of environments people tend to deploy to. So basically, you would tend to deploy the integration environment to do your integration tests, and then your staging environment for user acceptance tests, and then you're obviously finally your production environment. And I've actually got those running locally in Docker containers, as you can see here. So I actually tweaked it a bit more, Sander, as well. So after your initial unit testing, I then went and got it to sync with Azure Devops as well. So you can actually, from when you're running a GitHub runner locally, for example, you can actually sync in GitHub Actions to another repository. However, you may get an error when you try and do this about being told that the two different repositories are not exactly the same. And this is because, rather interestingly, GitHub runners do what's called a shadow clone. So in order to resolve this, what you may have to do, and I'll make this text bigger for you all now, is actually just issue a simple git pull request and say unshadow. So the GitHub runner will basically clone your entire repo. So, and then once that's synced with Azure DevOps, that will actually start another pipeline in Azure DevOps to deploy to another database that's in that production container. And once I'd done that, I thought, well, if I can get it deployed to SQL Server, what about if I tried changing it behind the scenes and get the SQL project changed to deploy to an Azure SQL database to save me, because like Sander, I can be lazy as well, to save me having to have two separate copies of that project for the two different database targets. So I actually managed to create a job to do that and set it to deploy, and it worked. And I thought, well, if it works for Azure SQL database, why don't I push it a bit further and try an Azure Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pool? Because that's a completely different schema, etc. And I tried it, and I actually managed to get that to work as well. And if we go into the code again, I can show you exactly how simple this is to do. And this is all based on your one database project in your one single repository to save you having to keep multiple copies. So basically, as you can see here, I downloaded onto what I call a GitHub runner. Then from there, I created a temporary directory on the local clone of the repository. I then ran some PowerShell, and all this essentially does is changes this line, which is called a database schema provider line in the SQL proj file, to be this line instead. And that changes your target for you to be a different SQL Server related service type. Once I'd done that in the copy of the project, I then created a DAT pack based on the copy and then published it back to GitHub so it's available for all the other versions. So what do you think about that, Sander?
Oh, that looks, that's all well and good. But what if you want to do something like approvals, like you can do in GitHub?
Well, it's rather interesting that you should ask. So whilst this is running at the moment and is not refreshing as well as it should, I will go back up a minute and I will show you. And this is something brand new, which is coming out in December, came out in December, that I'm going to show you all now. So as some of you who work with Azure DevOps may know, you can set these things called environments. And since December, you've been able to do the same thing now in GitHub, as long as your repository is public. So if I click on this one that I created earlier, you can see, Sander, I've added us both as reviewers. And then if we go back to the code, and I go through and open it back up again, to get that to actually take effect in the code, all I have to do is set these two lines. And I'm just going to zoom it back out again for everybody to see them clearly here. So these two lines means that when it gets to the production stage in this pipeline, it's going to ask me to approve it. So that's how we deal with that stage, Sander. And so, I'm not going to wait for the full thing to finish because obviously it's a live demo. So as you can imagine, it's unexpectedly delayed.
So, in fact, you can use SSDT deployment to deploy to the same pipeline, like I showed you earlier in Azure DevOps, right?
Yeah. So, well, you should know you wrote the tool.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, Sander's SSDT tool you can use for both GitHub and Azure DevOps. Of course, we can deploy the other services within GitHub Actions as well, not just SQL Server. So, for example, if we go back at the Actions, and then click on New Workflow, and I scroll down, you can see there's a whole host of other things that we can create initial workflow templates for, including Kubernetes.
Cool. So if only we were playing data platform bingo right now.
That's true. Okay, well, let's move on. And I've seen that we can use GitHub runners like I was just running on my laptop, even with our own network on premises, which are servers that Microsoft hosts in Azure do a lot of the processing and build and release tasks, like building various artifacts and deploying them. However, it appears that because of our infrastructure standard, we'd have a lot of issues internally, like a lot of firewall requests. So we're better off building our own runners internally instead.
Well, maybe, but remember, a lot of us are developers and we don't want to build our own servers. Plus, we'd have to figure out exactly what software to install, needs to be installed on those agents, maintain them, right?
Well, as I'm about to show you here, actually Microsoft provides you guidelines for how to build your own runners.
Ah, nice.
So, for the benefit of time, we've got to quickly cover packages.
Mm-hmm. So we can upload packages in GitHub because those are the results of our builds and everything. And it supports NuGet packages and Docker images in that feature.
Yeah. And also that reminds me, as you were talking about earlier, you can create your own GitHub account, of course, to test things on if you haven't already. Obviously, I know a lot of people already use it.
Yeah. And it's a really good thing to do, especially if you want to share your open source solutions like I did for a couple of my projects. Or if you want to test out things without the fear of breaking your company's GitHub organization.
Yeah. And to be honest, Sander, there's other things I'm looking forward to the team using as well. For example, we can create a wiki in GitHub if we want to.
Yeah, and there's also other integration and tooling for GitHub as well. And I say other, I mean like a very large amount is available. So, and GitHub also has its own CLI. Plus, GitHub is so popular, like Kevin showed you earlier in the session. Even Microsoft uses it for its SQL Server documentation and Azure Data Studio. So now we know all this stuff. Where shall we begin?
Well, I suggest that we start by getting both teams together and explain to them what we're trying to achieve.
So that is all we've got time for today. We've got a couple minutes left. So if there are any questions, please feel free to mute and shout out or put in the chat, whatever you want.
Indeed. And I've just figured out that the main reason that the demo was slow today, by the way, is because one of your presenters may have forgotten to turn on the power for their laptop, so it was running on battery.
Oh, man. You can prepare so much, but still the demo gods are not in favor of you.
Yeah, but at least you get to see the pipeline. And also, as well, just for the benefit of all of you, if you're going to do this on your own laptop and you're testing things like Azure DevOps and GitHub Actions on the same laptop, one thing I would highly recommend is that instead of running them all as a service, is that you actually install all your runners and your agents in separate folders on your laptop, and then just open them up one at a time in PowerShell and run them through the command line. Because otherwise, your services commandlet is going to get very cluttered very fast. And of course, if you don't forget to change the startup of those services, they're all going to take up a footprint. Another handy tip as well, especially for GitHub runners, I don't notice this so much with Azure DevOps, is that if you actually have your PowerShell running at the time, you can actually see your progress in real time like this. As opposed to the GUI, which I've noticed at times there can be a bit of a delay. So I just thought I'd fill that bit in there because obviously we missed some parts earlier because of, extra time. Mm-hmm. So has anybody got any other questions relating to any of this at all? I understand, especially from the GitHub Actions side of it, it's fairly new to people, and we do cover elsewhere the comparisons between the YAML used in GitHub Actions and the YAML used in the Azure DevOps for deployments. The concepts are similar, but the YAML is slightly different.
Yeah. And I have one question for you guys. So if I'm going to start a new project, I'm this fancy startup company, and of course I don't have a data center because I'm one of the cool guys. Everything is going to be cloud-based. Would I start with setting up using GitHub, or would I start with Azure DevOps for my team development? I had nothing to begin with.
Well, I think that because Microsoft bought GitHub, eventually the development will go faster for GitHub than for Azure DevOps. So new features will probably not in the near future, but maybe in a couple of years, you'll see that GitHub will develop faster than Azure DevOps will ever be able to. So and there's such a large user base in GitHub that there's a reason why Microsoft uses it for their source control as well. So, so I would choose GitHub in that sense. So I'm in favor of that.
Cool. So when I do set up my new startup company, and not going to happen anyway. Okay.
I like them both. They both have their advantage and their own things, but they are very similar in the functionalities. Just what fits your company.
And it depends as well. If you're working in reality, if you're working for a large team and you want to use a different process in Kanban or Scrum, and say if you want to use sprints, I have to admit this is where Azure DevOps kind of takes the lead a bit, because the Azure boards is a lot more features and a lot more advanced. If we're being honest here, it's. For Scrum teams and teams that work in Agile, or if any of you out there are working on CMMI, then obviously you're going to probably want to look more towards Azure DevOps, because that part is a bit more in-depth, let's just say.
If you look at them at a high level, Azure DevOps is really built for project management, like the stuff with the boards. If you look at GitHub, its origin came from being able to do anything with source control, and they added these features. So, if you really want to go into more complex project management, then Azure DevOps is your thing. But if that's not needed, then GitHub could be your solution. They both can do it, but.
Cool.
Yeah, I think we're kind of answering a question for Jens as well, because Jens actually asked in the chat about where to store SQL scripts, and again, it does depend what your intention is long term. If you're just sharing the scripts between you and all your colleagues, and a lot of them are using GitHub already, then just put your scripts in GitHub. However, if it's scripts that you want a team to use and then ongoing, you're going to use them as part of projects within a business, work items, things like that, you may want to look at Azure DevOps instead. There are pros and cons to both. And obviously, if anybody's got any questions relating to this, they can reach out to me and Sander. Either way, we're both, like you saw earlier, we're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn. Obviously, both our names are in the meeting invite, so you know exactly how to look for. So and we can we've worked with both over time. And like I said at the start, I'm a Microsoft certified DevOps engineer expert. Translated into plain English means I sat in the Azure DevOps exam. So we can help out on either of those.
Yep.
And
Cool.
yes, as Martin pointed out, even if it's only you, it's good to have the scripts and version control. And that is so very true because, as some of you probably know, people have their own ideas of naming conventions for different versions of files, including timestamps, _ode, _new, _January, _new. I've seen all kinds of weird and wonderful ways people have mentally tried to do source control over the years. And then they're having to try and find the right version still of their scripts. So version control is a lot better option. One version of your code in one place. If you make a mistake or something, of course you can just revert it. But then you have that one immutable copy and you have all your version control history in source control. And if you want to share it with people, you can do. Of course, for a lot of people, you can do all this stuff in a private repository, either in Azure DevOps or GitHub. And then if you feel more comfortable sharing it to the world, you can just make it public and say to people, here's a copy of my stuff. If you want to use it, then you can do. And they can either make a clone of it, which basically just makes a local copy, or they can fork it. So if they want, they can make changes and send it back up.
Make sure there's a license in there that says something like MIT or MIT licensing, that you are not responsible for anything.
Yeah, but if it's only SQL scripts, then it doesn't really matter.
Oh, SQL scripts can do a lot of harm.
Yeah, I just write a disclaimer, but obviously Sander will be able to give a lot more people advice what to do if it's a full-on open source solution, because he's a major contributor to DBA tools.
True.
They've had to go through all of this. And this stuff you can see on the screen now, the GitHub Actions, like I said, this stuff to do with the workflow and the environments, most of that actually only came about 2 months ago. But it's really good, that side of it anyway. Obviously, GitHub Actions has been on for a while now. Obviously, a lot of people are still have to get to do it for SQL Server, but it is really good.
Kevin, Sander, thank you for coming to SQL Friday. I'm going to jump into iteration retrospective right now. So.
Thank you, and you're welcome, and talk to you later.
Yeah, see you later.
So I can't promise the recording will be up today or even this weekend because I'm slightly behind on things, but I'll do my best and I'll let you know when it's up. Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Bye,
Bye guys.
Thanks everybody. Bye.
Thanks all of you.